This is the Saber Coach Kate podcast, where I highlight the great thinkers, athletes, and coaches in the dynamic sport of Olympic fencing.
Guard. Boy, on it.
Maureen Griffin decided to start fencing foil at age 14 when she quit the swim team and her dad told her she had 24 hours to find a new sport. 4 years later, she came to the U.S. on a fencing scholarship at the University of Wisconsin. After her retirement from fencing in 1988, she came back 2 years later as an épée fencer, eventually earning a spot on the Canadian national team. Maureen moved to the West Coast in 1995 because it was an épée hotspot and seriously focused on her training in San Francisco. That led to a bronze medal that year in Team Women's Epée at the PanAmerican Games. She lost her berth at the Olympic Games in 1996 by a very small margin and talks about how she overcame that disappointment. Maureen's transition to coaching started in foil, moved to épée, and culminated with a trip to Hungary to study under legendary Laszlo Szabo. She served as the junior women's épée coach from 2008 to 2013. Maureen has been the owner of Golden Gate Fencing Club in San Francisco for 20 years. She works tirelessly to build a positive team culture there and encourages a healthy competitive environment amongst the athletes. During this interview, you'll hear how she does that, as well as her views on the difference between losing and being beaten on the fencing strip. Tune in today to hear the fencing and coaching career of an extraordinary woman, Maureen Griffin. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Saber Coach Kate podcast. I am delighted to have as a guest on the show for today, Maureen Griffin. Maureen is a longtime fencer and also longtime coach. She is at the Golden Gate Fencing Center, and thank you so much, Maureen, for being on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me, Kate.
Okay, let's start with the typical question. How did you become a fencer?
I quit swim team, and my father gave me 24 hours to find a new sport.
Oh, that's a new one.
Yeah. I don't know. I was 14 years old. I was going to hang out, and I don't know what I thought I was going to do. But after about 2 days of me hanging out, my father was like, "You find yourself something else to do." And I went to the, there'd been a talent ID program. It was 1977 in Montreal. There'd been this talent ID program, and I'd been given this voucher to go try fencing. And it was like a year-long free course. And I joined. I think I joined mostly because I thought my parents would be like, "Oh, this is crazy. You can't do that." They shrugged, and so that reaction, I lost that reaction totally. But I had this year-long fencing course. The bad thing about it was a year of footwork.
Oh, wow.
It was largely
footwork.
And my parents were delighted because it was a year of footwork in French, so they thought it would help my French. And in June, after the year of footwork, of basically advancing and retreating and footwork games, they gave us foils and allowed us to fence, and I was completely hooked. I couldn't wait for the next fall to actually be in the fencing class.
So is that how the Canadian system works then? You do footwork for a year, or was it just this particular program?
That was 1977. That was a long time ago. When you think about it, when I actually did start fencing the next fall, it was a big issue for the club that I was at to have kids in the club, have young adolescents in the club. And I often tell my athletes the story of there was this rule in the club that I fenced in that you could speak only when spoken to. So the adults had to come over and start a conversation with you. And my parents, again, were totally pushing this fencing because it was a French club and it made me speak French. And I, quite frankly, was happy not to be spoken to because I didn't have to, get outside my comfort zone and speak in a second language. But it worked out. It was actually a really great atmosphere. The club still exists. My nephew fences there. Actually, two of my nephews fence there in Montreal. A bunch of my cousin's kids have fenced. It was a really good atmosphere. It did make me learn and speak more French. And it kept me involved in fencing.
Well, what was it once you got that foil in your hand that was so appealing to you?
I think it's the same thrill that we probably everybody experiences, which is it's problem solving at high speed. It's tricking someone into doing something. They often we tell the kids that, this is tag with a stick. You get to move, you get to solve problems. It was the movement. I think the movement really, I was in control of my own destiny, rather than being on a team where if somebody missed the shot, then the ball was out of bounds. And quite frankly, I had cousins who were boxers, and this was the closest I could get to boxing. No one was going to let me box in 1977. I had cousins who played hockey, and to some degree, fencing was closer to hockey. I started fencing. Started fencing as a foil fencer because that was what people did. But one of my closest friends was a modern pentathlete, and the deal we struck was that I would fence epée with her if she would fence foil with me. She was an incredibly good sport because when I look back, adding a sixth sporting event, which was foil for her, was incredible. It was an incredible, dedication. So I fenced epée from the very beginning of my career, which made when I did transition from foil to epée after college, made it a little easier.
Mm-hmm. What do you like about foil, and what do you like about epée?
I think I like the fact that they're different. I like the fact that they have similarities but differences. I think right now as a coach, what I love about the difference is watching young athletes make the decision like, oh, this is what I really want to do. In any of the weapons. And we've had kids come in who've said, oh, I really want to fence saber. And Golden Gate Fencing Center is a foil and epée only club. When the kids say to me, oh, why do we have saber? I'm like, because we haven't produced an Olympic saber coach yet. So when we do that, we'll have a saber program. Until then, we're just doing what we're really good at. So we do, when we have kids come in we've had kids come in and say, oh, I really want to fence saber. And we've had to say to them, you're going to need to go somewhere else where there's a saber program. And I think people do gravitate toward one of the weapons. For me, I liked fencing foil. But I was glad. I think there was a period in my life where epée just became more attractive.
Mm-hmm. You said that people gravitate toward each of the weapons. What kind of people do you think this is all stereotypical, of course, but, the weapon speaks to the fencer. What kind of people join each weapon typically?
So my favorite example of the stereotype of that is Michael Johnson, the four-time gold medalist from the Olympics. His son fenced. His son was a fencer at Golden Gate for a while, and we used to go to tournaments with Michael, and it always totally amused me. We'd walk into the tournament, and Michael would kind of walk over, watch his son fence. He's a great sport parent. Then all of a sudden, Michael would be gone. And I always knew where to find Michael because he was a sprinter. So I'd run over to Sabre, and there would be Michael watching Sabre, just fascinated. And he'd be like, I know, but it's just so cool. So I'd say, there's my example. There's my stereotypical example of a Sabre fencer. I think there's, I think the epée fencers tend to be the ones who love the minutia of the sport. They love the detail. They're the kids that'll sit there and fiddle with their tip until it's exactly 751 grams of pressure, and look, I got it. Whereas you'll watch them. It's kind of fun to watch the kids. Sometimes the young athletes, the epée fencers will be fiddling with their equipment. The foil kids will be looking like, I have no idea why you're doing that. Like, that's the dumbest thing ever. If it doesn't work, I'm going to bang it on the floor and hope it works on the next one.
Yeah. And
the electricity thing, I don't know.
And the saber fencers are like, oh, I've just done 15 bouts while you've been messing with your tips.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's great. Tell me a little bit about your fencing career.
So I went to University of Wisconsin on a fencing scholarship, and I fenced at Wisconsin from 83 to 87. And I actually, after 1987, Mike and I moved to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and we're at a club that is now Rose Albavarro's Twin City Fencing Center.
Oh, wow.
Club, excuse me. We were at a club called Minnesota Excalibur, and when we actually when we left, when we left Minnesota, that transition row, that Roe took over the club it became Twin Cities Fencing. But I quit. I retired in 1988 and was completely done with fencing. And in 1990, one day, I was kind of helping out at a club, and Mike said to me, "Do you really think that you actually have retired, or do you think you're going to look back someday and say, oh, I wish I'd tried a little longer?" And I realized he was right. So that was when I made my transition to fencing épée, and I made the Canadian épée team for the first time in 1992, and for the last time in 1997. So I had a really fun run in épée. We moved to Montreal. I basically commuted from Montreal to Minneapolis for a while during that period to train with the Canadian. I was on the Canadian national team, so I had to be in Montreal a lot more. I think that was really exciting. It was a really exciting, fun time. Women's épée entered the Olympics in 1996, which is phenomenal. If you're a young women's épéist now, you look at people who can say that and you're like, what? There was none before that. And it was a great experience. I enjoyed that whole time. Leading up to trying to qualify for Atlanta. It was great. That was the time. And I really then had that great feeling when that was done. I really felt a lot more confident about leaving fencing and coaching.
Mm-hmm. Describe a typical training day for you as an athlete when you were an active competitor.
So Canadian fencing at that time was pretty diffuse. It's a big country. There are fencers basically all over the country. So it was really hard to get a good training base. So leading up to Atlanta, it was actually, I moved to San Francisco to train because at the time, 94, 95, there was Paul Soter was the women's épée coach for the U.S. and there was a Laurel Clark Skillman. There was Jenny Gilbert. There was a really, really good basis of women's épée on the West Coast. There was Laura Mescal along the West Coast. So I moved to San Francisco in 95. So my training day at that point, that was a real transition for me because before that, I was a teacher in Montreal. So I taught all day and basically I was lucky enough to be teaching in a junior college that had a gym. I could go and work out. So I'd work out. I'd go do all my cardio, all my training at the gym, and then race to training in the evenings. But training in Montreal was largely at different clubs, so I was at a different club every night. So there was no that feeling of having a centralized location. Mm-hmm. When I moved to San Francisco, I had a much more stable training environment. I was training at the same club. I had the advantage of I wasn't teaching all day. I wasn't going to school. Because when I was in Montreal, I was working on my master's and going and teaching English and English as a second language and training. So it was a lot. Mm-hmm. I think as a sport, we've really evolved. There are people that actually can train a lot more and do and have some supplement. I was a carded athlete for Canada. I was getting some money. I'm not complaining, and I got a lot of travel benefits. But I think it's that making that commitment is tough. So my training day was segmented, which probably, in retrospect wasn't the most perfect thing. Mm. I think I was fortunate in some of the resources I had were really smart people that were able to advise me on how to train smarter rather than more. So I got a lot of benefit out of that training. I think moving to San Francisco and having great bouting was a big jump for my career. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, it's interesting because you've been talking about being an épée fencer, but I thought that in 1995 you got a bronze while fencing foil at the PanAmerican Games.
No, I got a bronze in épée. I was on the Canadian foil team.
Okay.
I was on the team for foil, and we were fourth. We lost to, I think it was Argentina in the bronze. We made the four. We were decimated by Cuba, who were later on lost a really exciting match to the U.S. for the gold. But and then we lost in foil. We lost to Argentina. Mm. I was on the foil team largely because ironic, this is the irony of the story, is Luan Juji Luan, who was the 1984 gold medalist, was the Canadian at that point, and she was fencing Pan Ams. And in the individual, when she made the top 8, she jumped out of the stands and sprained her ankle.
Oh no.
Yeah. So she hobbled through the 8 in the individual, but the day of team, she just couldn't fence. Juji's left-handed, and so am I. So decided, it was just in a vote in which I opposed very much, that I would take one for the team and be Juji.
Wow. So, like, did you wear her gear and, like, all of that, too?
I did wear her gear, and actually, it was, I think, it's a long time ago, but I think Dan Duchesne, there was a long semi-meeting about whether or not I could actually wear a lame that said Luan Canada rather than Griffin, and, whether or not we were going to take, a non-conforming equipment card on every bout for every, and I think that the Pan-American Federation decided that we were just going to let it go.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, okay, phew. It was tough enough to make those touches that I was making. I didn't need any help.
Wow. Well, what would you consider your greatest competitive accomplishment?
Oh boy, well, that's a good one. I think perhaps making, that the Pan American medal is a big. Was a highlight of my career in some ways. The year before at Commonwealth Championships, which is not really, Commonwealth Championships is not a big deal. We were silver medalists in team, and that was a really big deal for me personally. It was a kind of we'd had. It was a psychologically a big deal for me because the day of the individuals. One of my uncles that I was really, really close to had died, and it was hard to get myself back into fencing. He died unexpectedly, tragic, and to get myself back into the mode of fencing was really, really hard. I struggled with it in the individual, and in the team, I felt like I was really able to control my mental game. And I think of all the medals that I have, which are mostly in boxes, that one's one of the ones that I actually feel most proud of. Just in terms of my personal goals. We, as a team in Canada, my club won national championships 3 times, and that was kind of a big deal for me because that was all after my son was born. So it was a struggle to come back from having a baby. Mm-hmm. He was at his first national. Well, he was at his first nationals actually before he was born, and then his first nationals at 5 months old.
Wow.
So he was part of those medals. He actually has those ones.
Well, it's interesting that you say that silver medal is your greatest accomplishment, because some people might see that and think, oh, well, it's not gold. But that's what's so great about fencing, because you can build so much meaning and so many goals that can be set and attained within the structure of fencing. And so you don't always have to attain the highest level in order to get a lot out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm, as a coach, I'm really about the process more than the outcome. And I talk a lot about that with my athletes, and we talk a lot about what's our measure of success here. And that, the measure of success to me for that was, regardless of the outcome, was that I really felt in control of what I wanted to do on the strip. I felt in control. And we've had a long discussion. We were actually at a young teen women's Epée program. We've been discussing the difference between losing and being beaten. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important for athletes to acknowledge sometimes they're beaten. And I have this 12-year-old who recently said to me, no, I should have lost that bout because she's better than I am. At this point, I'm going to get better. Now, that is a really, really a great moment for someone to say, that person really beat me. And I feel that often in our sports rhetoric overall, not just fencing, we talk too much about losing without acknowledging the other person's good. The other person like sometimes you just have to respect that person, like, I had this discussion with one of the teenage boys, nice little kid, and he's fencing someone who's an NCAA All-American. I was like, let's be real about what's going to happen in this bout. You are 14 and he's 20. And he looked at me and started to laugh and said, I'm going to try to hit his hand and drive him crazy for the next 2 minutes. And I was like, that's a great idher. We'll see how it works.
Just annoy the guy.
Yeah. And I always remember my husband coached a young woman she was a little girl at the time, fencing Y10, a long time ago, fencing Y10 nationals. And she said, oh, this other person's really, really good. I'm just going to hope that I can wear her down and she'll make mistakes. And I was like, well, that's a pretty good strategy for a 10-year-old.
Yeah, I'd say.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. How did you approach the preparation for an important competition? And how was that different from your daily training? Like when you were ramping up for those PanAmerican Games, how did you alter how you were preparing?
I worked with a really a phenomenal sports psychologist in Canada, a guy named Pierre Beauchamp, and he really helped me with my mental games so much. And a lot of what I learned from Pierre was that I really needed to have a plan, and my plan might vary, but I needed to have that plan, and my plan needed to be written out. It couldn't be, we talk a lot about setting goals, and people are like, oh yeah, I have my goals and they're in my head, and I'm like, you need to have them written down. And the more you look at research, even in other fields of learning, we're looking at that change from, in a lot of fields, they're looking at the change from reading online to reading books again and actually writing goals as opposed to typing them out. I'm a real believer in writing stuff out. The same as I used to write out a training plan for the week before a tournament, what I was going to do, when I was going to do it, down to like, I really loved controlling my own, what I could control. So then I could let go of the things I couldn't control. I couldn't control the referees. I couldn't control crazy stuff, but I could control my reactions to it. So I would script out a lot of stuff that could go wrong. I remember going into PanAm's. PanAm's is a great example because Pierre and I had worked, and I was like, PanAm's is a small tournament. It's really high. The level's pretty high from the very beginning. And he and I worked on this great activity that, might not work for everybody, worked so well for me. We worked on my pool from hell, which was, who did I not want to fence in the first round? Because it's one pool and then direct elimination. Who did I not want from the Pan-American zone? And, I basically spent an inordinate amount of time sitting there going through all the lists, going like, oh, I don't want to fence. These are the people I don't want in my pool. And when we got to Pan Am's, there were 4 pools. And I remember looking at my pool, and kind of being like, oh, there's my pool. And I remember the American fencers, who I was really good friends with, looking at my pool and going, oh, God, your pool's awful.
The pool of death. And
I was like, oh, well, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And keeping out of the room, and they were all like, oh, Maureen's dead. And a lot of it was just my mental preparation. Pierre and I had worked on this pool that was 10 times worse than the one I actually ended up with, and it seemed fine. And I think I went 5-1. I think I may have lost to the American in the pool.
Wow.
So it was a great, and I lost by 4. It was a fantastic pool result. So I think being prepared and controlling what I could control, and then letting go of the rest, was really my preparation leading up to every competition. I was pretty fixated on having goals. I'd have written goals for every practice session. I'd sit down and write out what I wanted to work on. And then, I'd evaluate when I got home whether or not I'd actually reached my goals, or whether I'd forgotten that I was going to work on something and whether to put it on the next list.
Mm-hmm. What was your biggest defeat, and how did you bounce back from it, if you did?
That's a great one. My biggest defeat was that Canada did not qualify for the Atlanta Olympics. That was pretty devastating. We went to the zonal qualifier, and we lost to Cuba in the qualifying spot. There was one team was going to qualify, and we lost to Cuba. And it was the conditions were pretty awful. We were fencing kind of in a Quonset hut in the middle of nowhere with no air conditioning at high noon in Argentina. It was pretty awful. And I think we fenced all day. We almost lost to the Argentinians to get into the gold. And and I rested during that match, and then they put me back in when we were down, and we came back and won. So we were emotionally pretty high and pretty low. We were tired, and then when we lost to Cuba, it seemed like the whole Olympic voyage was over, except that there was this chance that the Cubans weren't going to get visas. So that was in March, and the FIE gave the Cubans an extension to try to get visas to go to the 96 Olympics, and they didn't have the funding to go. And I was at a World Cup in Budapest in May, and it was the last weekend. It was like basically 0 hour for the Cubans. One of the Cubans, I still remember I was walking into the sports hall in Budapest. One of the Cubans who I was really good friends with came running over and hugged me and kissed me, and she said, "We got our visas." Oh. The French, the French, we got money, we got funding. And I was like, oh, well, great for you. And I remember walking into this World Cup like, wow. And then we were, the Canadians, we all gathered together, and I'm like, that's it. We're not going. And that was devastating. For my teammates, somewhat less so. I was older, so that was 96 was really, I had to push my stack in on one Olympics, and that was it.
Yeah.
So I fully admit to being pretty much a bad sport through the whole. I was definitely in denial about Atlanta. I didn't watch the opening ceremonies. I watched a little bit of track and field. That was it. It was that was hard. Did I bounce back? I fenced the next year. I fenced 97. And at the end of 97, I fenced 97, I fenced 98. But I don't think, my heart wasn't completely in it in retrospect. At the time I thought it was. And then I really think that I was fortunate in the fact that by 99, I was still working with, the sports psychologist that I worked with had told me that I'd know when it was time to, when it was time to quit. And when it was time to retire. And I remember thinking that was the most ridiculous advice I'd ever heard, that there's no way I was going to, how would you know? I'm always going to fence. I had this feeling like I'm just always going to fence. And I was at a circuit. I was at an NAC, and the person I was fencing is still involved in fencing, and I can still feel that bout. And I remember being like, it was like 3-3, and I was like, oh, I am so done. It was like this epiphany. I was like, nope. Not feeling this anymore. This is it. I'm going to retire after this tournament. It was sad, but it wasn't horrific. And I was coaching a little bit, but not very much. And I really felt that, what I wanted to do was go back to the club and coach. Wow. And so I took some time off, and I was really happy to go back and, start coaching. At the time I was coaching a little. I was actually coaching in foil, because, my husband is a foil coach. So I was helping him out. So I was helping out in foil. And then, a couple of the young women wanted to try some epée. So I was like, oh, okay, well, we'll go over here and try some epée. And that really was how, did I plan to coach? Not really. I planned to coach for a little while, but I think I was incredibly fortunate what happened in coaching. So it was a good transition.
Well, and it's nice that you were the one that was able to make that decision.
Yeah.
And that it wasn't because you were injured or, and just mentally you were ready. And so there isn't that regret like, oh, I wish I could still be a competitor. It was just time to move on in your progression in the sport.
Yeah. And I did fence. I did, it was kind of a joke, kind of a little bit of a joke and a little bit of, I remember telling my Canadian coach, I'm retiring. I'm done. And he said, no, you're not done, because he had some young fencers, and he's like, no, we're still fencing as a club. We're still going to fence Canadian nationals, and you need to fence team at least. So, I fenced team in 2000, 2001, and 2002. So we won those 3 titles. And I remember, I love fencing team. I love team, even beyond the point of actually not wanting to fence the individual. I was still qualifying for, Canadian nationals, but, fencing those team events, even though I actually had psychologically really made the choice that I wasn't fencing competitively anymore, that was a lot of fun. And winning those medals was really fun with my teammates, with my young teammates. It was a great way to end my career. I made a brief attempt as a veteran to come back and fence. And I fenced saber, actually, Kate.
You did?
I did. Because I really didn't, I didn't understand saber, and I thought, well, I'll learn, and I learned some saber. It was really hard for me, and it was a great experience. It's a great experience to learn, right? And so I learned a lot about saber. I learned that it would require a lot more time and energy than I had to be a better saber fencer. And since that time was going to come out of my coaching time, I ultimately decided that I couldn't do both as well as I wanted to, so I was going to do one well. So you saber people are lucky. I'm just kidding. Or not.
I was just thinking, oh, that would be really fun.
It was, I did, I fenced one vet, and I fenced a vet NAC, and Kelly Williams coached me. And I kept on thinking, I have to admit that the competitive part of me was like, Maureen, you really got to pay attention. You've got Kelly Williams coaching you. You've got to do something intelligent out here. And I was like, oh boy, this is so beyond. This advice is so good. And I'm like, I don't know that I can do that. Okay.
He doesn't want to do that.
I understand that. I conceptually understand that. Not sure I know how to do that yet, Kelly. But okay, I'll go try.
Well, you talked about how you just gradually got into coaching. Who were some coaching mentors that you had? And what was your coaching education like?
So if I go back and I'm totally honest about my coaching education, it's actually really funny. In 1983, I really wanted to fence. That's all I wanted to do. My parent, it was one of those things where, I was 19 years old and my parents were like, you need to go to college. You need to do all the things that people do. And I was like, no, all I want to do is be an athlete. I want to fence. I'm going to go to the Olympics in fencing. And my parents, I came up with this harebrained, this is 1983. I came up with this great plan. My coach in Montreal was Hungarian, and his best friend was this guy named Laszlo Szabo, who some people know wrote a book called Fencing the Master.
Yeah, it's only one of the most important books ever.
So my coach in Montreal was like, you could go to Hungary and learn to fence from Laszlo Szabo. And I was like, I could? That would be the coolest thing ever. So I basically spent the year before that, scrambling, working every job I could so I could go to Hungary. And this is 1983. It's still communist Europe, and my parents are like, you're not going to Hungary. But my parents, who are, among my biggest heroes, finally, I don't know. As a parent, I don't know how they did it, but they were like, okay, you're moving to Hungary. We get it. I hope it works out. This is great. We're going to support you as best we can. But I moved to Hungary. I packed up my bags and moved to Hungary and was going to work with Laszlo Szabo and his son, András Szabo, who later on was the Greek national coach and now was coaching in Germany for a little while. And very quickly on in my time in Hungary, Laszlo Szabo really decided that I was an okay fencer. There were lots of okay fencers, and there were much better foilists. So what I got out of that was really a great coaching mentorship. Or Laszlo Szabo basically would teach me how to coach.
Wow.
So yeah, I fenced. I fenced a lot of foil tournaments in Hungary and all over Eastern Europe. I got this great, basically an unpaid internship in how from Laszlo Szabo. So that was really the beginning of my coach education, my fencing coach education. I worked at a junior college in Montreal. Some of the coaches there, sports psychologists that I worked with, a lot of other people I think have been really, really helpful. My husband Mike did an international fencing FIE fencing master school in Montreal, and I got to hang out a lot and see a lot of that. So I think I've been got a really, really enriched education. Not to even start talking about who in the U.S. I've known Bucky Leach my whole fencing career. Bucky's Bucky's been great at sharing information. Gary Copeland at Northern Colorado Fencers, I think has influenced a lot of what I do. Roel Salbovero, Not to mention, I was coached by Paul Soter for a while. Paul's really big on creating a program and having a programmatic approach. I've learned a lot from him. There are 4 coaches at Golden Gate Fencing Center. We coach collegially, so it's coaching education every night. We do group lessons a lot of times, and we'll all do the same action, but with the fencers. We do a lot of coaching education, sit around, usually spend a Friday afternoon talking about coaching. We're really fortunate that way. I think I've been really fortunate that. And just if you're paying attention in the U.S. at circuits, if you're paying attention at World Cups, you just learn so much. Cornell Udvar-Haley has been really helpful. I can't actually, as I go through this, I think about pretty well everybody. It's really an open environment. I've learned a lot from, some of the French coaches, Michel Sicard, Daniel Levavasseur, incredible coach, incredible teacher. So I would say that in terms of coaching education, it's such an ongoing process, and really exciting.
Wow, that's an incredible coaching resume right there. I mean, you just mentioned like every major coach in modern times, and you've gotten to pick their brains and bring out your own style thanks to all of them. That's amazing.
I've been involved in fencing for 40 years now. I was talking to one of my little fencers once. We were at a tournament, and we were basically walking through the room, and she jokingly looked at me and said, "You know everybody." And I was like, "Well, if you spend 40 years in the sport, you probably should know a lot of the people."
One would hope, yeah.
Or you need to take another look at what's going on.
Yeah, you shouldn't be hiding in a corner at a tournament. Yeah.
No.
You served as the head coach for the 2009 to 2013 Junior World Championships, and you also coached the USA Junior Women's Epée team to a silver medal in 2010 and a bronze medal in 2012. What does it take to coach fencers at that level?
I'm going to steal this line directly. I'm going to paraphrase. I'm not stealing it, but I'm going to give him credit. Sebastian Dos Santos once gave me one of the best pieces of advice, and he's like, look, you have to view this largely as a managerial position. You have a bunch of talent in front of, and actually my personal coach in Montreal, Bernard Boucher, once told me this too. He's like, look, he phrased it in a very French and a very, very Bernard Boucher way, which was like, look, everybody's trusting you with their good athletes. They've worked very hard with these athletes. Don't mess it up. And I was like, okay.
No pressure.
But that's a very French way of viewing it, man. I was like, you could possibly do something idiotic right now. Try not to.
Thank you. Yeah.
But maybe Sebastian phrased it in a little more positive way, because he was like, this is the using the right pieces at the right time. And I would say that in 2010, which was the silver medal in Baku, I had the fortune. That was a phenomenal. In 2009, the U.S. won a bronze in Belfast in team women's epée, and Rosa Bavaro was the coach. I was there, and one of my athletes was on the junior team, and I stayed around to watch her fence, and watching Ro. And Ro is an incredibly generous person in terms of his knowledge. So watching Ro and talking to Ro during that was really, really helpful to me, and gave me some great ideas going into 2010. 2010, I think one of the things that the team was phenomenally talented. They were great. They fenced so well together. We had a great strategy. And the other thing was that the second coach in the box was Sebastian. He was there as the men's epée coach at that time. So, and working with Sebastian was probably one of the highlights of, you asked about my highlight of my fencing accomplishment. Probably that 2010 and 2012 medals were some of the highlights so far, because I'm going to do other things in my coaching career, just because of the way they worked out. In 2010, collaborating with someone like Sebastian was just phenomenal. That team worked so well together. That was really, really fun. The bronze medal in 2012 was a big highlight, because we beat the team, somewhat of the team that we'd lost to in 2010 for the gold. So it was kind of cool to come back and see how in 2 years how the women's epee team had progressed. But I really think that that to some degree at those events, to come back to your question, you're really working to you've got a bunch of pieces, and as a team coach, what you're trying to do is put them in the right order. It's a puzzle, and you're trying to put them in the right order to get the result you want, which is obviously a medal, which is obviously a gold medal, and that it's less. I think that technically at that point, at World Championships, you're not changing anybody's technique. You're working on tactics. You're working on the fencers coming in, the fencers really feeling confident in their own. That's their preparation, but you're working on making sure that you do everything to ensure that they have the day rolls out perfectly in front of them. And anything you can do, which is, results in some pretty funny stuff sometimes, like finding the shoe that, the defending world champion has somehow lost on her way to the venue. I'll go back. I'll find the shoe. Let's just move on, No, just really seriously, I think that, it's not necessary. And then you look at other sports and you see how really good, tacticians can do that. I live in the Bay Area. As an example, Steve Kerr, Golden State Warriors. My son hates the Golden State Warriors, so I have to be very careful about this. But Steve Kerr's a coaching genius, and the way he can move people. He can move people around and make them feel really effective in their roles. I think that's largely a coaching, especially team coaching.
Well, and you've mentioned that several times too, that spirit of team coaching being something that you really integrated into the culture at Golden Gate Fencing Center. Mm-hmm. Talk about you've mentioned the coaches that are there and mm-hmm. that you get together on Fridays. Talk about how you made that decision to build that kind of environment at your club.
So we're actually celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. So we've been around for a little while, which I think it's important to remember as an entity that's fantastic, but it's important not to be complacent and just say, well, we've been around for 20 years because it's always evolving. When we have to give the 20-second, the elevator spiel on GGFC, we say it's an individual sport in a team setting. So we have the athletes work together a lot. They work together, and the groups change all the time, but it's really based on that idea that it's a community and they're working together. So that we'll have junior men's epee, or youth men's epee and junior men's epee, junior women's foil, junior women's epee. It's really collegially based, and when we do goal setting, each fencer sets individual goals and goals for their training group. So, and we've been really successful. One of the first groups of women's epeists that I coached, was a while. They're all in graduate school or doing phenomenal things as individuals now. But their goals, we went back after when they were retiring from fencing, and looked at the goals, the most successful year that we had, their goals, which were lofty. And I remember looking at their goals and thinking, wow, their goals were to put 2 people on the cadet/junior world championship team by the end of the year. And I remember looking at these, a group of teenage women thinking, well, you're in the band, but that's a pretty lofty goal. And they did it. And they won a national title. They had, they'd set these goals, and they were goals for the group. It was, regardless of who succeeds, we all succeed if someone succeeds in the group. And I think that's really important. And I think that having goals other than your own personal goals is both holds you accountable and is also a little. It also makes it a little less stressful. And I think that especially young adolescent athletes are under a lot of stress, not only in their sports, but in their lives. So if you can just make that you can flatten that out a little more, it's better.
Wow. It's pretty rare to hear of a club where you set goals like that as a group, and how,
when you were saying it doesn't matter which two go and achieve that goal, that's just incredible. I mean, because most of the time it's people that want to elevate themselves, and to have created that kind of environment is really special.
Thank you. I think that one of my favorite coaching stories is I had a young woman who was a pretty good fencer, and we went to a junior World Cup, and by a series of really awful things, her bag didn't arrive. So she, at the tournament, was sent over to the vendors to buy equipment, bought all brand new equipment. Unfortunately, they hadn't explained to her that she needed to check in first and then go buy equipment. So she went over, bought all this equipment. In the meantime, they closed check-in at this World Cup.
Oh no.
It was a World Cup in Montreal. It was devastating, and it was a small World Cup at the time. It was a junior women's epée World Cup. It was really small. And ironically, she would have been the 42nd fencer, so there would have been 6 pools of 7. Instead, there were 41 fencers. And despite our protesting and paying the FIE fee, she did not get in. And this was a devastating moment. She probably wasn't going to fence another World Cup in her career. And I remember watching her pack up all this brand new equipment that her dad had just bought her, crying her heart out because and her dad saying to her, well, we're in Montreal. It's a cool city. We'll go shopping. And she looked at him and said, no, I'm going to stay here and cheer my teammates on. And I remember thinking like this, and I said to her, no, you really, and we all gathered together and they all said, no, you can go. This is pretty awful. And she's like, no, I'm going to stay for you guys.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, wow, I don't know if at 17 I would have done that. And she stayed to the bitter end, and one of her teammates won. And she looked at me when they were playing the national anthem and said, this is justification.
Wow.
And, wow, you are away, and I remember thinking that while I was really proud of the program and proud of what, as a coach, I accomplished. I was like, I am so fortunate, blessed, whatever word you want to use, to have these women, and I really need to remember this. And I try to remember that. I do remember, and I tell the young women who come into the program about that a lot.
Wow. I got a little verklempt when you were telling that story. That's really neat.
A long time ago, and I still, and she went on to she's a phenomenally talented graphic artist. She's worked for Samsung. She's worked for Facebook. She's a phenomenal human being. Really interesting, fun person. She still comes back and fences. And her parents, say that fencing was, a big watershed moment for her, which I certainly hope it was. I certainly hope it helped her in her life. I think it does. I mean, I think all of us involved in fencing can say that it impacts other parts of your lives.
Yeah, completely. It says on your club's website that all the coaches at GGFC are Positive Coaching Alliance certified. Can you explain what that is and why it's important to your club?
So Positive Coaching Alliance is an organization started by a man named Jim Thompson at Stanford. He was a basketball coach and a professor in the Stanford Business School. And the Positive Coaching Alliance is largely the idea that sports is more than a scoreboard. That what we're looking at is an experience experience by which people grow. Whether that and it's by young youth athletes. It was a youth sports movement. So he has concepts like, that basically this is about mastery. This is about mastering a skill, mastering yourself. The PCA is big on this idea of honoring the game, that it's not about an outcome at any cost. It's not a win at all cost. It's about embracing competition. It's like people often say to me, "Oh, PCA, that's so like you're just making everybody feel good," and it's not. It's really about holding athletes accountable. We talk a lot about one of the major concepts of PCA is a concept called roots, which is that you have respect for your officials, the opponents, the game, your teammates, and yourself. And I think that's a really big lesson. for kids, that this isn't about the worst examples that we sometimes focus on. We focus on the examples of, I'm pulling from the past, but John McEnroe screaming at officials and thinking that's cool. We do a lot of, and because of the PCA model at GGFC, and because we believe that, we do a lot of stuff where the kids have to come out, the older kids come out and ref the younger kids, and you build empathy that way. If you have to ref for 5 hours standing on your feet, the next time some referee makes a bad call, your tendency to go crazy on them, I hope, is really diminished, because you were that poor person that made that bad call and had the athletes go, no, that was my parry riposte, and I can't believe you didn't see it. And maybe you don't say that. And one of my favorite things about coaching athletes at Golden Gate Fencing Center is that referees will often come up to me and say, "Oh, they're really good sports." To the point where jokingly, one of my best athletes once, we got to this point where at a tournament, I finally had to look at the referee and say, "No, she can't acknowledge every floor touch. You need to look at for some of them. Please, could you please not have her doing every?" She was so dishonest. She was like, "No, I hit the floor." I was like, "Okay." And then at a certain point, the referee had been trained to be just like, "Did you hit the floor?" And she'd be like, "Yeah." I was like, "Come on." Yeah. But so PCA is one way we do it. We also are all involved in John O'Sullivan's Changing the Game project, which is it's largely, I don't think that the PCA and Changing the Game project are dramatically different. They're all about what they call transformational coaching, which is that coaching is beyond just X's and O's, and a lot about athletes learning to accept responsibility, to accept challenges, and to work toward their own goals.
What do you think about the current manner in which young athletes are trained in sports? What is good, and what should be changed?
I think it's so critical that we remember that a young athlete is a young athlete and not a mini adult. I think we don't always do that and that's not just in fencing. I think that's as a culture that a 10-year-old is not a short adult. They're a little person, and their expectations are really different. I think we need to listen to our youth athletes a lot more. And I don't think we should build a system for the outliers. I think we should build a system for the average average athlete, and then the other ones will, the phenomenal talents will always be there, but I don't think you can build a system where you're winnowing out too early. And I base that, I look at that and I think back to my time in Hungary in 1983, where there was a really, really rigid model of because the base was so large, they could afford to cast off people really quickly. One of my favorite parts of the Laszlo Szabo Fencing in the Master book talks about is the intro, in which Laszlo Szabo says, teaching fencing is like teaching calligraphy. You don't know who's just going to be a beautiful copier and who's going to go on to write phenomenal works. And really in fencing that, I think we have this idea that we can tell, and to some degree we are looking for, especially, we can argue this because we do as a sport, but you can say that you can tell, you can look for markers, absolutely. But I don't think that we necessarily have to cast off everybody, nor does the model for a 10-year-old have to be the same model as it is for an Olympian. Right. That we sometimes instead of letting 10-year-olds fence, we overlay. I think this is a sports culture across sports in the United States. We emphasize competition over skill mastery too early. And I think that costs us. And we often will look at the example of other countries and say, but name your favorite European nation or your favorite Asian nation are doing that. And that's how they get these incredible results. And I think we're looking at the tip of the iceberg. We're not seeing what they actually do in their clubs when we see their fencers at world championships or World Cups. We're just seeing the top band, and I think we need to serve the whole band.
Mm-hmm. How do our regional and national competitions for youth fencers help or hinder their development? Like, what's good about that system and what could be better?
I think that system. I think I'd say that system. I was on the youth development committee many years ago, and I think that system, like some of the other things, like clubs, like any entity, it's a living organism, and it has to be. You have to look at it and maybe change it as you go along because your audience is different. And I think that's really hard. I think it's hard to keep up with that growth. I look at some of the events and I think, I look at some of the national events and I think that, like, in Epée, when you have 300 fencers in an event, I don't know that you're serving your membership or you're serving developmental fencing in, like, Junior Olympics when you have huge fields. I don't know what you're really selecting for there. So I would, and I understand that. I totally understand the cachet of going to Junior Olympics is way better than going to the regional circuit. I'm going to Junior Olympics. Wow, your friends are like, wow, I'm going to the regional circuit. Yeah, whatever. But I think we might need to look at. There's got to be a size at which fencing, a fencing competition gets too large. I don't know what that is. I don't have an answer. But I would say that we probably need to look at that a little more analytically and look at where people are dropping out, especially our youth fencers. And maybe we need to look at some other models. In soccer right now, they're instead of doing chronologically based grouping, they're doing something called biobanding, where they actually look at where kids are in their physical development and try to put them together that way. Because we've all laughed at what a bunch of Y14 boys look like. You've got, as one of my fencers once said, he's a baby-faced little guy. He comes out, he's like, I just saw my opponent. He's shaving in the bathroom.
Oh my gosh.
Scared. Y14 men's epée, Yeah, he is, and he is 6'2". You're right. It is going to be.
I'm so sorry. Try and get a couple wrist touches, honey.
Yeah, exactly. And hit the hand, stay away. Hope he doesn't run in.
Yeah. That would be interesting in fencing, because I've had people ask me, well, is it based on weight categories, or, is it based on height? And I'm like, no, it's just age.
Yeah. And I think we have to be, and this is something that maybe, the PCA, maybe has made me more aware of. Jim Thompson's really, one of his big things that he touts is Carol Dweck's mindsets, which is that whole idea of being open, having an open mind, thinking about learning in an open way rather than fixed. And I think as a sport, it's really hard. And as administrators and coaches in sport, it's hard not to say, this is the way we've always done it. There are 4 coaches at Golden Gate Fencing Center. Fencing is a combat sport. We occasionally have very different opinions. And, so we have this one question. We have a series of 4 questions that we ask when we start arguing over how we're going to do something is, and the final one is there a better way to do this? And it's sometimes really humbling to look at something and go, oh, the way that I've been doing this for the past X amount of time is not the best way any longer. One of the other things that we do a lot is a couple of the colleges publish whatever class is coming into that college, what the real markers in their lives were. I have if you look at the high school seniors that are graduating right now, have no concept of what a fax machine is.
Right.
We talk about faxes and they're like, the Twin Towers didn't exist in their lives. And we make all the, it's hard to keep up. It's hard to keep up. And as much as that changes, our lives change too. And our references should change. And perhaps our ideas should change.
Well, unfortunately, I feel like I could pick your brain all day. You have such interesting things to say. But our time together needs to draw to a close. So I'm going to finish up with the mixture of famous questions from James Lipton and Marcel Proust. Okay, you ready to tackle these?
Yes.
All right. What is your favorite word?
Yes.
What is your least favorite word?
Can't or won't.
What sound or noise do you love?
Laughter.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Gunfire.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I'd like to be a teacher in some other aspect, other than teaching fencing. So it's kind of the same thing, right? That wasn't really fair, but that's what I'd like to do.
Any particular subject?
Pretty well anything. I really love learning. I think learning is. I think we're so hardwired to learn. I think learning is just such a great lifelong experience. You know?
What profession would you not like to do?
I'd be horrible in a medical profession. So I'm just squeamish, and I wouldn't be good.
Where would you like to live?
I'd like to live anywhere my family is, but I guess if I got to choose my like total idyllic location, I'd live on the coast of Ireland, somewhere far away from, somewhere really green.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What do you value most in your friends?
Loyalty or honesty.
Who is your hero?
My whole family. I've been surrounded by heroes. I think everybody's heroic. I think everybody that gets out of bed every day and tries to do better than they did the day before is a hero.
And what is your motto?
Oh my gosh. My motto is probably anything by John Wooden. I will admit that when I looked at that one, I tried to think of what my favorite was. And I think I decided that it was things turn out best for people who make the best of the way things turn out. That's a John Wooden. Anything that John Wooden wrote, I can sit and look at forever and go, wow, that was a great way of saying that.
That's really good advice. Yeah. Well, again, I'm really sorry that, we have to sign off here. I've really enjoyed hearing your thoughts on all of this, and might need to pick your brain on the mental aspect of training at some point.
Awesome. I look forward to that.
Yeah, I'm sure you've got some really good insights into that as well. You kind of touched on that, but I really would like to delve into that more.
Great. I look forward to that.
So thank you so much for your time today, for being so open and sharing, especially about your club and about your own personal history with fencing.
Thanks.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. It was fun.
A big thank you once again to my friend and teammate, Tony Escueda, who edits all of these interviews and who has produced all the music for this podcast. Thank you as well to my executive producer and husband, David Sierra, who always proofreads my questions and gives me ideas for new interviews. Big thank you to all of you listeners out there who have been so supportive and who keep asking me for more episodes. Please email me at sabercoachkate@gmail.com if you have any ideas for interviews or questions you'd like me to ask people. You can also visit my blog at sabercoachkate.wordpress.com for articles about fencing in general, or also a place to download all of these episodes in case you don't have access to iTunes. You can find this podcast, of course, on iTunes, and you can also access every episode on my new Saber Coach Kate podcast YouTube channel. I hope you can check it out.